Wildfire protocol. The first time I met Luca Fontana, he told me I was about to evacuate the wrong neighborhoods, and I was absolutely certain he was wrong. My name is Tyler Anderson. I'm 27 years old, third-generation firefighter, and I've been the emergency response coordinator for CAL FIRE's Redding Division for 18 months. I grew up in Northern California, watched my grandfather fight the Dixie Fire, watched my father work his way up through the ranks. I know how to manage evacuations. I know the protocols, the timelines, the statistical models that tell us how fast fire moves and where people need to be to stay safe. I know my job. Luca Fontana was an Italian wildfire behavior specialist brought in by the National Interagency Fire Center to consult on the Diablo Ridge Fire Category 5 wildfire that had started in the foothills 2 days ago and was currently threatening 120,000 people in the greater Redding area. Fire behavior modeling, prediction, coordination. That was supposed to be his expertise. Instead, he was looking at my evacuation map and telling me it was wrong. "You are evacuating the residential zones first," he said, in an accent thick enough to cut through the operations center noise. But the fire is not following a traditional progression. It will not reach the residential zones for another 18 hours. You are creating bottleneck evacuation simultaneously with the threat. You will lose people in traffic accidents before the fire ever reaches them. The model shows the fire moving northeast at 12 miles per hour, I said, not bothering to hide my frustration. That gives us 42 hours before the fire reaches the residential neighborhoods. We evacuate the immediate threat zones first, then expand. Your model assumes wind consistency, Luca interrupted. But the wind is changing. The fire has created its own weather system. The convection is intensifying the wind patterns. I predict the fire will accelerate to 19 miles per hour within 6 hours, which means residential evacuation needs to begin now, not in 12 hours. That will trigger massive panic. Traffic gridlock. People will abandon cars and try to flee on foot. We'll lose coordination. You will lose people, Luca said flatly. Either in the next 12 hours when the fire accelerates beyond your model, or in the chaos when you try to evacuate 120,000 people simultaneously. He pulled up thermal imaging from the aerial survey. Look at the convection pattern here. The fire is not spreading across the landscape like you predict. It is building vertical structure. It is creating updraft systems strong enough to transport embers 15 kilometers ahead of the fire front. I looked at the imagery. It showed exactly what he was describing: unusual fire behavior, complicated convection patterns, evidence of accelerating conditions. If I evacuate residential zones now, without confirmation from the fire front, I said slowly, and the fire doesn't accelerate as you predict, I've caused massive disruption for nothing. Yes, Luca said. That is the cost of being wrong towards safety. If I am wrong, you inconvenience 120,000 people. If you are wrong, you kill them. I spent the next 90 minutes reviewing Luca's analysis. Fire behavior modeling, thermal imagery, atmospheric conditions, wind pattern data. Everything he was showing me made sense, terrible, frightening sense. The fire was behaving abnormally. The convection pattern suggested rapid acceleration. If he was right, my evacuation timeline was wrong by hours, which at that scale meant deaths. But my protocol said to expand evacuation zones gradually, to trust the fire models, to avoid unnecessary panic. I called the Shasta County Emergency Services Director. I want to initiate full residential zone evacuation, I said. Immediate. All neighborhoods within 15-mile radius. That's not in the protocol, she said. We're still within the safe expansion timeline. The fire isn't following the standard model. A wildfire behavior specialist has identified erratic acceleration patterns. I'm recommending we evacuate residential zones now, before conditions worsen. There was a long pause. Then, is this the Italian consultant? Yes. What's your confidence level? 60%, I said honestly. Maybe 70. But if he's right and I don't act, we lose thousands of people. And if he's wrong and you do evacuate, we cause massive disruption and lose public trust in future emergency management. I know, but I'd rather explain why we evacuated safely than why we didn't evacuate in time. The director approved the expanded evacuation. Within an hour, we'd issued orders for all residential zones to begin immediate evacuation. The highways filled with cars. The evacuation centers started receiving thousands of people. The emergency services went into full-scale crisis management. And then the wind shifted. I was in the operations center at 18:30 hours when the fire behavior suddenly accelerated. Not by the 12 miles per hour in my original model. Not even by the 19 miles per hour that Luca had predicted. The fire accelerated to 23 miles per hour, driven by convection updrafts that were pulling in surrounding air and creating their own weather system. The fire reached zones that were still being evacuated 18 minutes after my evacuation order was given. If we hadn't started evacuating when we did, those zones would still have been full of people. I looked at Luca across the operations center. He was watching the real-time fire behavior, updating his models, showing no sign of satisfaction that he'd been right. "Thank you," I said. He looked up. "For what?" "For pushing me to trust data I didn't understand. For being willing to say you disagreed with protocol. For potentially saving thousands of lives." "I did not save anyone," Luca said quietly. "You saved them. You listened when someone challenged your authority. That is rarer than you realize." The evacuation continued for the next 18 hours. 118,000 people moved safely away from the fire path. By the time the fire reached the residential zones, they were empty. The fire burned through neighborhoods, destroying property, devastating the landscape, but it didn't destroy human lives, because I'd listened to someone who challenged my expertise. The Diablo Ridge Fire burned for 19 days. It consumed 312,000 acres. It became the 5th largest wildfire in California history. And through all of it, Luca stayed in Redding, advising on fire behavior, coordinating with field teams, providing real-time analysis that helped keep everyone safe. I was at the operations center with him when the fire was finally contained. We'd been working together for 19 days straight, updating models, adjusting strategies, responding to fire behavior that kept surprising us. "You could go back to Italy now," I said, not looking at him. "The fire's contained. Your consultation is complete." "Yes," Luca said. "I could. Are you going to?" "No." He finally looked at me. "I have accepted a position with Cal Fire as the chief wildfire behavior analyst. They offered it during the evacuation, and I said yes." "You're staying." "I am staying in California. But more importantly, I am staying with you." Luca stood up, walked closer. "For 19 days, we worked together. You provided authority and protocol. I provided analysis and challenge. Together, we kept people alive. I do not want to go back to Italy and pretend I can do that work alone." "What changed?" I asked. "You came here as a consultant. You could have consulted and left. You changed," Luca said simply. "You chose to listen when someone challenged you. You chose to risk your career on data you didn't fully understand because you trusted the person presenting it. That kind of courage, professional courage, the willingness to admit you might be wrong, that is what I want in a partner." I didn't say anything. Instead, I kissed him there in the operations center, with the fire maps still glowing on the screens and the smell of smoke still heavy in the air. By October, the Diablo Ridge Fire was completely contained. The burnt landscape was beginning the long process of recovery, and Luca and I were trying to figure out how to build a relationship when we'd met during a natural disaster and fallen in love while managing a crisis. "Relationships are easy," Luca said one evening, sitting on the porch of my apartment in Redding, looking at the fire-scarred hills. "The difficult part is making sure we do not lose the things we learned during the crisis." "What do you mean?" "During the fire, you trusted me completely. You put your career on the line because you believed my analysis." Luca turned to face me. "But now the fire is gone. Now we are just two people trying to build something normal. I am afraid you will start doubting again. That you will decide my challenge is criticism, not partnership. Is that what you're afraid of? That I'll stop listening? I am afraid that challenge becomes conflict when the stakes are not life or death." He paused. "In a relationship, every disagreement feels like a fire. Every conflict feels like we might lose everything. But we have to keep listening anyway. We have to trust anyway. We have to choose partnership even when it is not convenient. Then we choose it," I said, deliberately. "Every day. Every day," he agreed. Epilogue: 6 months later, fire season is over. Cal Fire has implemented Luca's fire behavior modeling across all its divisions. The new methodology has prevented 3 major evacuation disasters and improved response coordination statewide. Luca has been invited to present at the International Wildfire Conference. I've been promoted to Regional Emergency Coordinator, overseeing 5 fire divisions across Northern California. We've bought a house together outside Redding Small. Nothing fancy, but with a view of the mountains where the Diablo Ridge Fire burned. The landscape is recovering. New growth is emerging through the blackened soil. The forest will come back. I think about that first meeting a lot. How Luca challenged my authority. How I wanted to dismiss him. How I realized that listening to someone who disagreed with me was not a sign of weakness but a sign of competence. Fire season will come again. The Diablo Ridge Fire won't be the last disaster we face. But we'll face it together, him providing analysis, me providing authority, both of us willing to change our minds if the data suggests we should. That's partnership. That's love. That's to people who understand that the person who challenges you most fiercely is the person who respects you most deeply. Last week, I asked him to marry me. We were standing on the ridge overlooking the burnt forest, watching it recover. And I pulled out a sapphire ring, the color of the sky during the evacuation. The color of the sky when we worked 24-hour shifts together. The color of hope in the middle of crisis. He said yes before I could finish asking the question. I have been saying yes since the first day, he told me. I just was waiting for you to ask. We're getting married in the fall, when the new growth is thick enough that the burnt landscape looks like recovery instead of devastation. Our families are coming, my California firefighters, his family from Italy, the emergency responders who worked the evacuation with us. And somewhere in the vows, we'll promise to keep listening, to keep challenging each other, to keep choosing partnership even when it's not convenient. Because that's what the Diablo Ridge Fire taught us. The most important decisions are made not when everything is clear, but when everything is burning and you have to trust someone enough to change your mind. Luca taught me that. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I learned the lesson.